So a short time ago, a listener of mine wrote in and told me that he took 3 large doses of psilocybin to combat depression that he was having trouble with treating any other way. I invited him on the show, and today we are going to talk about it and what it did, how he felt, and what he's doing now. I am Dr. Dave. Stand by because this is Microdose U, and you are really going to enjoy this episode.
Enter the world of magic mushrooms with Microdose U.
Hey, so David, what's going on? Welcome and thanks for being here. And tell me, you've got a story. You sent me an email. Tell me what's going on with you. Tell me from kind of the beginning. What's up?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, this story began a long time ago with a decent amount of emotional trauma, as a lot of people have from their childhood, and I'd been dealing with it for decades, seen many therapists, and was getting to a breaking point. And so I happened to sit down one day, and Netflix was on, and it preloaded that How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And I'm like, they started talking about LSD, and I'm like, I know nothing about LSD. Let me watch this. And so I started to watch it, and I was amazed at the research they were doing back in the 60s and 70s. And then I was like, wow, this actually may be helpful for me, because over the years I had, through all the therapy and everything else, realized that I had this intermittent depression, but it felt like the depression wasn't what they believe, as an imbalance of chemicals. It was more, the way I see it is, I had dysfunctional coping skills. So if I had a stress, my mind would take my inner critic and start hammering me with negative thoughts, telling me how I wasn't good enough, how I wasn't worthy, those kinds of things, usually a lot worse than that. And then I would fall into a depression because of all the bludgeoning I'd just taken. So I never wanted to take antidepressants. They blunted me. I didn't like them. They didn't really stop the voice. It was always this inner critic there. So watching that show, I'm like, wow, this is the default mode network, all these deep ruts that you have. And I'm like, this seems like this should work. So I started looking into it, found that there was only a couple places where it was theoretically legal, like Jamaica and the Netherlands. And so I quickly signed up for a Jamaica retreat. And that was perfect. I mean, it was yes.
Back up for a second, Dave. Tell me, just give me an idea. You don't have to go into like what caused this, what your trauma was. You don't have to go into that. But what would a typical day be like for you when you said you were depressed and some things triggered? What did it feel like to you? And how often did that take place?
Well, over the years, it became more frequent. I'm in my 50s, and before I did this journey, my inner critic would hit me with negative comments. I don't know, every hour or two. Whatever stress, we could be driving. I'm married, so we could be driving to in-laws' house, and as we're driving, it's kind of silent. My mind just starts going crazy, and it's like, yeah, you're just not good enough. You are less than your wife's previous boyfriends. You're this, you're this. I mean, it was just endless, telling you how you weren't good enough, how you didn't deserve to be loved, and it was unbearable at times. And it was getting. I tried mindfulness over the last couple of years. I'd been working on that, tried all kinds of things, but so I started doing mindfulness. That seemed to quiet it a little bit, but it didn't take away any of the power. I mean, it was, you might get 2 or 3 hour gap, but it was still just endless. And you're like, why are you in my head? Why do you keep saying this? Why are you constantly repeating these kinds of comments? So you just couldn't get rid of it. I mean, you're like, hey, I'm going to go work out and stop thinking. Nope, doesn't stop. It just kept going. And 2 years ago.
You tried other than mindfulness, did you say you tried? Were you using any kind of pharmaceuticals, or did you do talk therapy or anything like that?
I did both of those. I'd been seeing a therapist for 20 years, off and on. I had tried several different antidepressants, SSRIs, and like I said, I just felt blunted, and I never felt like it actually stopped the inner critic from throwing comments out. Childhood, there was a decent amount of emotional trauma. My father had committed suicide. I was told that it happened on Father's Day, so I was like, okay, that's my fault. My mother had some struggles of her own, and there was a few attempted suicides as well, which there was blame passed, and so there was definitely a feeling that I wasn't good enough, since both my parents wanted to get out, and then there was just the typical childhood traumas, but those kinds of things were there, and my grandfather, who was my only father figure at the time, he passed away when I was young, and then I got a stepfather who initially was very involved, and then there was the conflict because anytime he tried to parent me, there would be a fight between my real mom and him, and eventually he said, you know what, I can't do this anymore, so he disappeared. Even though he's still in the house, he wasn't there for me emotionally, and so I felt abandoned again. So there was a lot of this abandonment, a lot of feeling of conditional love, and a lot of feeling of just not being good enough or worthy. So yeah, I tried those medicines. I didn't try anything else. I didn't get into any other coping mechanism of like drinking or those kinds of things. And I will say that the one thing that was very important during that whole time was my children. I mean, they were definitely the anchor that kept me around.
Well, first of all, let me say we can't change the past, but I'm just so sorry to hear about that. That's really rough, and it makes sense that it turned into what it turned into. So I am really sorry about that. So then you were on antidepressants. Sounds like off and on maybe, but then you were watching the show, and tell us what happened from there.
Well, so I watched the show and I was amazed by the science and kind of the mysticism, since they don't seem to know exactly what's really happening other than the 5-H2A receptors. It's kind of a mystery. But I was really amazed by the science. So I quickly looked to find something legal because I didn't want to do anything that was going to get me in trouble, since I am in the medical field. And so I found a place in Jamaica, and I signed up for it, and I tried to do as much research as I could. Wasn't having a lot of time to do that, but went down there. I was a little nervous because Hurricane Ian, I think it was Ian, was coming around the Caribbean Sea and was skirting the bottom side of Jamaica, which is where we were at. And I was really nervous. I don't do anything that really messes with my head. I mean, I'd been drunk twice in my life, and but
Let me just interject. Because you're starting to set up this, going down Jamaica, you're in Jamaica, but what was promised to you, or what was I don't know if marketing material is the right term, but the material that you read or found out about this place you were going to, what did they say you were going to be doing, and what did they say what the results would hopefully be?
Well, you were there for a week, and it was a group session, so there was like 10 of us. You were going to do 3 doses separated by a day each, 3 heroic doses separated by a day each. Actually, initially, I thought the first day was supposed to be a lower dose, and we were just going to see how you do with it. That's how I interpreted it. And there was that you would come out with an amazing adventure. That was pretty much it. I don't want to say there was much other than that promised. But it was, you were going to get 3 doses. You were going to have a facilitator, access to facilitators while you were there. And so, but it was, and I was totally fine with the group session. It was, that was reasonable. Everybody had a story. You felt a lot of common humanity because everybody's stories they resonated. Parts of everybody's story would resonate with you. And you're like, wow, yeah, I know that feeling. I know that feeling. So that was kind of nice. And then that first day was actually the next day. So you showed up in the evening. The next day, we had a morning session. Everybody talked about what their intentions were, what their plan was, what their problems were. Honestly, I came in like a knight in shining armor. I was like, I'm going to annihilate this. I'm going to destroy this. And they're like, no, calm that down a little bit. Let's say we're going to make peace with it or something along those lines. And I'm like, okay. And so then we went around. We had a little session. They gave us a bunch of capsules to take, and they gave me more than they were giving other people. And I'm like, what do you know that I don't know? Am I going to be a tough case? And they said, well, you think too much. You think a lot. You're very analytical. And for those people, typically, if you can push the dose a little higher, they can get to a point where they're not really thinking. They just let it happen. And so,
do you remember what the dosage was?
Yeah, first dose was 4 grams.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so in other words, most other people had a little less than that, you're saying?
Most people started around 3.
Okay.
There was, there was one person who was on SSRIs, and I think he started at 6. They bumped it up. No, it gets better for him. He had 12 on his last dose, and he was swimming in the ocean or in the Caribbean Sea at an hour and a half. So he was, I don't know, it was amazing. But yeah, so I had 4 grams, and we didn't eat. We had breakfast, and then we didn't do anything for 5 hours, so we were all on pretty empty stomachs. So it came on pretty quickly. But I strapped myself in. I had to really get my mindset ready. Like, okay, just let go, and see where this takes you. And so about 18 minutes in, I'm just watching the pelicans dive. Like I said, this hurricane is coming around the south part of Jamaica there, which was perfect because it was. You talk about set and setting, and this was the setting. I mean, you've got a storm. You can see the thunderstorms in the distance. It was just wonderful, and you're like, okay, let's make it happen. And so 18 minutes in, you start to see some blue speckles, and pulled down the mask, put the headphones on for the soundtrack, and just went for a ride. And it was unreal. I mean, it was really unreal. I'd never experienced anything like that. On the upswing, there was a lot of pretty colors and fractals, and then it seemed like maybe an hour or so into it, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was a band of energy just floating through these colors. I mean, I just did not even recognize that I was who I was. And then there was a period in there where I don't know if I blacked out or what, but I don't remember anything. And then when it came out on the other side, on the downslope, there was some more pretty colors. There was a dark scene that was like a dark swamp, but there was nothing else going on. It just looked scary. And then there was just this visceral reaction to the music and the sounds, and I just cried like I've never cried before. And then the last scene, I actually got a scene. I got a visual scene, and I come into this swamp, and there's a big tree in the middle of the swamp, and in front of that tree, there's like this 10-foot being in like a death outfit, like a big robe, and you can't see his face, and it's dark, and I see over there on the other side, I see like a 5-year-old me right in the middle of the swamp, and I walked past death, with death, it was my inner critic, and I put my hand out and I said, I got this. And I went over and hugged my little self, and that was the end of it. And it was kind of like, okay, you're done. And I lift up the mask, and I look out, and the storm is gone, and there's this beautiful sunset, and I go walking out to the beach, And one of the facilitators came out there with me, and I just rambled for an hour. They had to tag team, and then another facilitator came over, and I rambled for another half an hour. And then I called my wife and my kids and told them, and it was just amazing. I mean, it really was. It was really phenomenal. And
So I've got just a question about so far a question. So it sounds amazing. It really does. When you were like at the, let's say at the peak, when you felt like you might not have been in your body, or even when you walked past, that symbol of death, and you came up to your younger self. If there had been, I'm just curious, if there had been like an emergency, let's say somebody said there's a fire in the building where you are, or something happened, do you think you would be able to come out of this trip and be in real life as much as possible? Or do you think there would have been just no way you would have been able to understand any instructions for anything whatsoever?
well, when I was just a band of energy, I'm not sure how that would have gone. I think that I would have been able to come out if somebody had woken me enough. I would have been able to come out. I would have been pretty woozy. I would have been able to follow instructions, and I would have been able to walk somewhere. No problem, I don't think. Like I said, the other gentleman, he took a huge dose, and he was swimming at an hour and a half, which is about the time I probably was floating in space. And he had no problem. Other people would, instead of going deep inside, they would journal. They would just write their thoughts down on a piece of paper. And so they did that the entire 4 hours. I know on my last journey, I actually got scared to take more because I'd shaken the snow globe so hard that I was afraid I was going to lose what I received. And I was really scared. So I only took 1 gram on my last dose. And so I was able to watch some of what the other people were doing, and some of them had some decent uncomfortable feelings, and they were able to come out and actually have a discussion with their facilitator right then and there. So I don't think I don't think you're that out of it that you can't come out and now I wouldn't drive a car. I wouldn't try to go use a jackhammer or something like that. But yeah, you can, if you let yourself go, you're going to go in deeper. And if you try to stay on the surface, then you're going to be closer to the surface. The second journey, like I said, I was scared that I had...
Back up. Sorry,
Yeah.
Let's back up for one more second. Before I want to hear about the second journey, but how did you feel? It sounds like this took place during the day sometime, the first journey. How did you feel that evening and then even into the next day? Did you feel different in any way?
Well, that night, I was excited. And I was super excited. I was utterly amazed that night. I went to bed and I woke up 3 hours later and I'm like, maybe I'm just so excited. So I wrote down all the notes that I could think of about the journey. But then I started to get a little bit more nervous about what could happen. Like I just got this. I want to try these new shoes out. I don't want to keep shaking the snow globe and see. I want this to settle first. And I was afraid I would go backwards. And then I was also afraid, I have some, I like to overanalyze things. And I do that all the time. But I was afraid that was part of who I was, and that this medicine might tell me that that's not what you should be doing, and then it would change that. And I'm like, well, that's my identity. I don't really want to lose that. So I started getting scared. And so that's why I was saying in that second journey, I kind of stayed a little bit more superficial. Even though I took a bigger dose, every time I would feel the wave of energy coming on, I would move my leg so that I would not go as deep. So I do think that you can be conscious with a big dose. It's not like you're completely snowed, but if you let yourself go deep, then you will go deep. But yeah, so I got scared that I was going to lose things that I had gained. And so I tried to stay more superficial. But the second journey was a bigger dose, 5.5 grams. and I didn't get out of body. Most of it was dark, except for there were like 7 or 8 scenes where you actually had like video scenes, and it was interesting because they always talk about how the medicine kind of knows what you need, and this second journey was cherishing me, showing like my little self who I'd become as my big self, and so it had all of these different features about how you had helped all these people in life and all these different things, and then at the very end there was one of those cinematic things where I'm there with my little self and the camera pans around the room, and by the time it gets around, now my little self is my big self. So it was just me. So my little self kind of evolved into who I was. The things that were interesting after that, I mean, both journeys were just filled with this love feeling. I didn't have, I mean, even though that swamp scene was kind of scary in the appearance, I wasn't scared. I wasn't nervous. I'd gone in with the mindset. Some of the research, they talked about these flight instructions where you're supposed to go towards things that are scary, and you ask with curiosity, what are you here to teach me? What do I need to learn from you? And so I never had any fear. It was real, other than the fear that I was going to lose something. I didn't have a fear in the journey.
But when you were saying, I think even you mentioned in your second journey, things got dark, or things were dark. When by dark, you didn't mean scary? Did you mean
No,
actually physically
meant,
dark, or did you mean serious, or what did you mean?
just pitch black. Like the first one had
Okay.
pretty colors with the fractals and all that kind of stuff, but the second one, it was pitch black until you said scene, and then the lights would come up, and the scene would happen, and you would see this wonderful experience that it was showing you, and then the lights would go down, and you'd be just enjoying the music again until the next scene happened. So it was just a completely different kind of pathway, and there were other people who had, I know about 14 people who've gone through heroic doses, and there is a whole plethora of what they do, but there was one guy who just had one scene. And in his scene, he had his resolution. He got some forgiveness, and his depression he'd been fighting for the last several years went away. And he never took another med after that. And there were other people who had scary journeys, where you have to kind of listen to your soundtrack beforehand, because I know one of the things that was a complaint down there was one of the soundtracks had a bunch of opera. And it really detracted from the journeys for several people. And they're like, why didn't I know this? And I'm like, when I was preparing, I listened to it at work so I could hear what the sounds were. So I was like, I like these songs. No, I don't like these songs. And I'd heard the opera, and I'm like, no, I don't want to listen to that one. Not that I don't like opera, but it was wasn't for the journey.
Right. So they let you take a test drive of several soundtracks, and you got to choose kind of what you wanted, you're saying?
Yeah, they gave us a list of like 4 different soundtracks on Spotify, and they were 5 or 6 hours long. 2 of them were from Johns Hopkins, and one was their own, and so you could hear that, and so we ended up at the time I didn't have Spotify, so I downloaded or got their 1 month free, that way I wouldn't have any commercials, so you could. But yeah, you could pre-listen, and it was nice. I mean, it was great camaraderie down there. It was nice being on the beach. You were it felt very exclusive. Every morning I'd get up I was already up at 3. So I'd go out as soon as the sun came up, and I'd just go walk the beach, and I was listening to music, and I was thinking, trying to put this together, all the stuff I just was given. But it was also fighting with this anxiety of, is this going to last? Is this, those kinds of things. And then by the end of the week, I wasn't sleeping, but 2 to 3 hours a night, and it was not great sleep. And so when I came home, I was already fatigued. And the next week was the same thing. I couldn't fall asleep. I mean, I'm running on 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then that's when the real struggle came. During the journeys, it was cake, But the next 3 weeks where I wasn't sleeping and I was dealing with this general anxiety because I didn't realize I was as anxious of a person as I was, and that I had these coping mechanisms that I just ripped off. You know, I mean, my inner critic was always there to take care of the anxieties. I mean, you would get stressed, but the inner critic would come in and say, "Oh no, you're just bad and worthless," and then you would totally forget about this problem that's causing you this new anxiety because you're now focused on how you weren't good enough. Not even with that situation. You're just not good enough in general. So I had no coping mechanisms. So I had to relearn all my new coping mechanisms that were healthy, that were, reasonable. And so for those first 3 weeks, I was not sleeping well. I finally got a few things that helped me start to sleep, some anti-anxiety meds. I hadn't been on anti-anxiety meds ever. And so I started a small dose to help me fall asleep. And
What were you taking? What kind of anti-anxiety meds were you on? Right.
what is that one? It starts with a Z.
I mean, it wouldn't be. Zoloft wouldn't be.
No, it's not Zoloft. It's
Antidepressant.
I don't know. It was a little green pill, and I honestly, I'd never
That's
taken
okay.
it.
But it
was
not benzo. It wasn't a benzo or anything.
I don't
Benzodiazepine.
think so.
That's okay.
Well, yeah, I don't exactly know what it is.
That's okay.
go
No, that's
find
all
it.
right. But what did you think? So you came back from this trip to Jamaica, and you weren't experiencing depression anymore. It sounds like, but you were. It sounds like you had a lot of anxiety, at which you had to go on medication to go to sleep. What did
Yes.
you think of that? And how did you ultimately take care of that if you did?
Well, this was one of the things that I learned after the fact. I didn't get to do the research well enough to realize that one of the most important times, if you're doing a heroic dose, is the integration. They always talk about integration, but I didn't understand it when I first read about it. But and they don't even talk about it in that show, that How to Change Your Mind. But later I found out that these patients who experienced this wonderful love, like the cancer patients who had the existential dread, those patients would get a heroic dose, and then they would do like 9 sessions with their facilitator therapist afterwards to work on recalibrating, basically. And that wasn't set up, and that wasn't part of this journey. That was not promised. And so I wasn't ready for that. I didn't have my regular therapist set up. I didn't have a real good game plan. So when I came back, this other advisor I had in my head, which I called the worst case scenario advisor, was telling me, "Oh, you just messed this all up. Now you're not going to sleep. And I was starting to feel like I was going to die because I was really exhausted. I mean, I'd lost 12 pounds, and I was just exhausted. But then I found that I had some new powers, because when I had these anxieties, I wasn't having the inner critic come in and take over, and you could start to work on things. You would have an experience. As an example, this was just a real quick. So my wife was working from home. Obviously, it was COVID time. So she's working from home. She's in a Zoom meeting. I go down. I'm trying to talk to her. She's ignoring me completely. I don't even know if she didn't hear me or she just completely ignored me. She was in a meeting, and normally I would walk away from that, and my inner critic would tell me that, that you're a loser and that kind of stuff. And I got like 10 steps down the hall, and I'm like, stop. What is most likely here? Most likely is she's at work. And if she were really at work, you would be just like, okay, she's at work. And so I was able to recalibrate these thought processes. Instead of going to a negative place, I'm like, oh, she's so focused. That's awesome. I should be proud of that. I should, and those kinds of things, step by step, started happening. And you're like, hey, I've got these new superpowers. I can start fixing these things. And so I worked on the worst case scenario person that was that advisor. I'm like, no, what's most likely? And so those things started to happen. But I also had found a facilitator. I tried calling my regular therapist, and it was kind of like, she was like, oh, well, the inner critic will be back. And I'm like, I don't think so. I hope not. But, so that wasn't super smooth. And so I found somebody who was very comfortable, who had experienced, plenty of people going through heroic doses and dealing with these anxieties after the fact. And as he likes to say, he was teaching me how to surf again. You know, the waves just keep coming, but you just learn how to surf. And that's what he did for me. And I was able to move forward. And then at a point, you know, about 6 months down the road, I felt like I had moved as far forward as I could. I found some new, not inner critics, but other critics in my head that weren't nearly as strong and were kind of hidden. And I said, well, let's do another heroic journey. And I did another journey 6 months later. And that journey was just full of love and just amazing little.
On your own? Just,
No, with this facilitator. I did it with this facilitator. And those critics were gone. And it was then it was smooth sailing after that. Those were how those journeys went. But that first journey was really phenomenal. And the other thing I got out of the first journey that may have happened during that downtime was I came out and I realized I had forgiven everybody who had ever slighted me, even myself. But it was like, wow. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, I bullied from 8th grade, those kinds of things. It was really phenomenal that it just kept giving. But like I said, that first part was really hard when I came back and I had all these uncovered anxieties and my coping skills were all ripped away and I had to relearn them. And so, but I would do it again. It was phenomenal. It was really,
give me an idea how long ago this was, like from now, when you went to Jamaica. Was that it sounds like it was a couple years ago, or you said something about during COVID. So it was during so a year and a half ago. Okay.
It was
and so
September 22.
So okay. So now we're fast forward to the present. How on a scale of like let's say 0 to 100, how much improvement, like where do you feel you are now as compared to before you went to Jamaica? Would you say you're running it like 100% right now, the way you really want to be? Or are you still on any type of anti-anxiety or sleep medication to get you to sleep at all?
No,
nothing.
After that, I'm on no medication. I stopped taking those meds about a month and a half after the first journeys, the Jamaica trip. I started sleeping. I started getting 5 hours of sleep. Then when I started to get some of that anxiety out of the way, I started sleeping a little better. And so I haven't felt like I needed that. And now I sleep really good. Fall asleep in 10 minutes and get a full night's rest. On a scale of 100, well, before I went, when I first sat down and watched, and I just happened across that How to Change Your Mind show, I was probably at a 10 out of 100. I was thinking daily about ways I could actually off myself and make it look like an accident. That was, I didn't want to leave anyone with the, hey, look, your dad committed suicide kind of thing. And I was thinking about that daily. All those thoughts went away with the first journey. Yes, I had a bunch of new anxiety and I thought, I'm going to die because I can't sleep and I'm not eating well. And, but other than that, I was like, hey, now I'm ready. I don't want to die now. And now I would say I'm 95, 96. My one problem is I have these expectations. I just always have expectations that are just set way too high or something along those lines. And I had a conversation with my facilitator friend a couple days ago. And he said, this is because I said something about, I'm fearful that I'm going to lose this and go backwards. And he said, no, dude. He said, no, dude, you are where you're supposed to be. You need to get used to it. You need to get used to the fact that you are just in a such better place than you were, a year and a half ago. And after hearing that from him just a couple days ago, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, it just really set me to a little bit a decent amount of calm.
He sounds
So
awesome. He
he's
sounds really awesome.
he's a great guy, and
Yeah.
he's just there for you all the time. He was very grounded, and so yeah, he's fantastic. And but yeah, it really is night and day. And I will say that when we were talking about doing this interview, I was thinking about how I was a year and a half ago, and that stuff is so far out of my mind. I actually had to sit down and really think about how was it a year and a half ago. I mean, how much trouble was it? And there was a decent amount of, like I said, when I sat down to watch that show, I was thinking, I don't have much more than a month left. Either this marriage is over in a month or I'm over in a month. Something's happening. And that's why, like I said, it was so fortuitous that I saw that. And that's the part that disappoints me the most, is that this research was being done in the 60s and 70s that gets squashed. And you find out that you start to see all the research they're doing now, and you're like, wow, they're talking about anorexia nervosa, and these people are coming out with no longer being diagnosable. In that show, there was a guy with OCD. There's, all these people are on substance abuse with alcohol or cigarettes that are all just having phenomenal results. Plus, the people I have seen who've had depression and anxiety, who come out of their journey and are no longer on meds. I had a friend of mine who was on anti-anxiety and depression meds for the last 6 years, and they had a phenomenal journey, very troubling. I mean, it was a very difficult journey. They actually came out and had to talk to the facilitator and work through stuff, and there were some really scary scenes for them. But I was talking to him on the phone the other day, and I'm like, you've never sounded happy. And I've known this person for 20 years. I'm like, I've never heard you this happy. And she's like, I am just at peace with everything. And I'm like, wow, that's phenomenal. So it is, like I said, it's disappointing that this isn't out there in the mainstream better. And I'm hopeful that things change. I mean, I know that MDMA is supposed to get Schedule 3 supposedly this year. I mean, they've done 2 phase 3 trials. And so I'm terribly excited about all these things that are just phenomenal. But I feel bad for those people who don't realize this is out there, and this is such an awesome opportunity.
It's interesting that you said that, because I know I've got a lot of listeners and people that watch my videos as well. And I know, in fact, I just did a podcast episode about this. I know there are so many people out there that are listening to the message, listening to my message, listening to the, the healing and the positivity about this whole thing. But for some reason, they don't want to start. They're just, for some reason, there's a block. They don't want to do anything. They're happy to listen. They're happy to know what maybe could happen in their lives in a positive way, but they're just, for one reason or another, they're just not taking that step. Do you have a word for anybody that's listening that is in that situation? They think it sounds great. They know they're in a bad place, but they just say no. What do you have to say to them?
Oh, that's well, I felt similar. I mean, like I said, I was scared to do this. I was scared to go forward, but you get to a breaking point, and I just happened to be lucky that my breaking point showed me another door. So I would say to those people that are afraid to do it now, don't do anything to the negative side. If you get to a breaking point, realize that this is an option. I mean, this is a phenomenal option. The problem is, I feel bad for those people who don't have any clue about. I didn't know anything about this. I mean, going to med school, we were taught all these things were bad. I mean, I asked my wife about it. That's where we met, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And she's like, "Oh, we were taught these were all bad. These are all Schedule 1s. They have no medical validation." And I'm like, "Yeah, but what do you think now?" And she's like, "Well, maybe they were wrong. Maybe they were teaching the wrong things." So I would say definitely realize that this is an option. It is a solid option. And it doesn't have to necessarily be the heroic dose. I mean, as you've demonstrated with your journey that I've listened to, as my facilitator described it to me, and I'd already done the heroic dose. This is my found facilitator who helped me get out of the dark place afterwards. He said there's the way he described microdosing versus macrodosing. The microdose is this nice gentle walk through the woods, and the macrodose is like you're on a roller coaster listening to, hard rock and and it's a thunderstorm at the same time. He said it's a very good shaking of the snow globe. But I will say that everybody I've known, except for a few people, have had a wonderful journey, and they've all seemed to have moved forward in whatever they're working on. The one thing I will say to that, though, is if you don't have your intentions well-rounded, really, really focused, then you may not get what you want because, well, you didn't really know what you wanted. But if you come in and you're like, hey, I've got this depression, I've got this anxiety, these are the things, I've got this inner critic, these are what I want to work on. If the medicine deems it, then that's what you'll be shown, and that's where you'll go, and that may be what you work on. But then on top of that, that neuroplasticity you get after the journeys that last for a couple months, where I had these new superpowers, that was amazing, the amount of growth I made during that time period. So you can be afraid. You will gain an immense amount of information and hopefully get the answers that you need to help you through things. But just don't go the other direction. Don't be afraid of this that much that you're like, oh no, I can't do this as a way to save myself. And that's the sad part people go the other way.
It's a shame that when you were in Jamaica, though, it's a shame they weren't doing some of the work that needs. It sounds like they weren't doing some of the work that needs to go along with the dosing, whether it's a micro or a macro dose or heroic. I know in our program, Dr. Denise and I have a hands-on program just for people that don't want to go this alone, and they just want somebody to help hold their hand while they're, so to speak, while they're going through it. But we have a program where we're not just having them microdose, but we're actually working with them every step of the way on where they want to be on their goals. And I think that's
right.
a pretty big thing. It's a shame you didn't have that. But have you considered, or have you been microdosing at all, kind of like as like maintenance type doses, or you're okay just not doing anything whatsoever and you're totally fine?
Well, right now I feel totally fine. I mean, it's interesting because you still have anxieties, you still have human emotions and responses and things like that, but it's so much easier to cope with. And so at the moment I'm still feel like I'm moving forward, so I haven't felt like I needed it, at least now. A few months back, I was looking into this, and I actually did a 6-week session where I microdosed. And I had some anxieties, and I still was feeling this conditional love, that I still had this belief that love was conditional. So I was like, let me work on this. Not a very strong belief, but it was enough that it was impeding things. So I did a 6-week course. I was doing, I guess, mostly the Stamets setup. I didn't take the niacin, but I was doing the rest of it. And there were times where it would flare up my anxieties a little bit more, which was one of the questions I had for you, because I was curious during that first year, as you were doing it, did you have accentuation of anxieties, or did it? Because my facilitator once told me that if you have that, maybe you should look deeper into that, because that may be something that you need to work on more. And it's kind of showing you, hey, look over here and look at this to see if you should work on it some more. But it was a good experience on that. But I will say now, I don't feel like I need anything. I feel very solid and stable and grounded. I mean, there's still things that I want to work on, but it really is a huge change. I mean, huge.
That's a wonderful story. We'll get back to that in 1 second. I'll just kind of briefly answer your question to me. So I do remember. So once I started microdosing, I would say I really did not have an issue with anxiety. It just, for some reason, and I know everybody's different, so I'm not saying that everybody's going to experience it exactly the same way I did, but basically my anxiety melted away almost from the beginning. However, I do remember one time, probably about 1 to 1.5 years into my microdose. To be safe, let's say about 1 year into my microdosing, everything was going great. I remember my wife and I were on an RV trip, and we were somewhere, I can't remember where exactly. It doesn't really matter, but I remember I microdosed that afternoon, and we went into a Mexican restaurant, and for some reason I felt like, and I didn't even know why, but I felt very anxious, and I could feel my heart beating, which is very unusual for me because I just never experienced that at all. And it did all, and I thought it was very odd because I had never experienced anything like that from a microdose, and it did ultimately go away, never to return. But when I work with people, what I've found, and I don't know if this is your case or not, I don't know if this is the case during my camping trip, but I found that if they increase the microdose a little bit, somehow, and I don't know how to explain it, but the anxiety comes on if they take too little. I've worked with quite a few people, and I say, let's try to increase it a little bit more. It's still a microdose, and then almost all have said yes, that went away. So again, I'm not sure about that weird odd day for me, but I would say for me, is to answer your question, I really, my anxiety has absolutely melted away, and as well as my depression. I experience none. You did say, we're still human beings. We still react if we see bad news or hear something that bad has happened. We still have feelings, totally. In fact, I would say the feelings are more true than they used to be, because you're really reacting to true things and not just things that you're imagining. However, the anxiety from the news or from something happening is nothing like the really bad anxiety that you experienced before that. It's hard to explain.
Right.
I'm not even so sure I'd call it anxiety. I would call it just like reacting normally to something bad. That's what
Right.
we want to do. We're made to do that.
Right.
So, but yeah, the microdosing journey has really totally ended my anxiety. I feel like I flow through every day now, and seamlessly. And I know there's no guarantee. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but I hope it's going to be the same. But it's been an amazing journey. So I think it's pretty clear that we can achieve really excellent results by doing things different ways. I'm
Right.
more of a microdoser. You've done this on larger doses, but we've gotten to the same place, which is that's the most important thing. I always say on my podcast, I always say, I'm not really here to teach you exactly how to microdose, although I can do that. But you're not here only to learn how to microdose or how to use magic mushrooms. You're here because you want to feel better every single day, and we've got a lot of tools in our toolbox to get you there. But it's not only like how to make psilocybin tea or something like that. It's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more involved. So as long as we get to where we want to be, to that end goal, that's the most important thing. So I applaud you, David. I mean, it sounds like you've had a really rough past, very rough, and that's not to be minimized in any way. But looking at you look really happy. You look like you're fulfilled. You look like you're doing great, and that's I'm so glad to hear you feel that way too. It's amazing. Any last minute thoughts before we? And by the way, I want to share this with you. I think just doing this little interview with me, and I really appreciate reaching out by email a short time ago, because whoever knew that it would turn to this. But just by doing this, I guarantee you are helping out more people than you can ever imagine all across the world. So I applaud you for wanting to come on and do this with me, because you're helping a lot of people. So any last minute words or thoughts you want to mention?
Well, I guess first would be recommendations. Just real quickly, recommendations. If you're going to do a heroic dose, I would make sure you have a facilitator that you're comfortable with, that you can communicate with, and that you're set up to do things with. Typically, you do it, you talk to them that day after your journey, you talk to them the next day, make sure you're still good, and then you talk to them about a week, and then you can push it out further. But at least on that first dose, I would recommend a facilitator. I mean, like I said, I had a couple friends who had rougher ones, and they wanted to talk to somebody during the journey so that they could get through it. The second thing is, during that integration period afterwards. And it sounds like it would even work during microdosing, because basically it's an ongoing integration nonstop, since you're constantly firing off all those little receptors and opening up these pathways. But the things that really worked for me was journaling, gratitude. The other thing that goes with gratitude is grace, which goes along with my expectations. You know, I have these high expectations, so you need to give yourself some patience to realize it's going to take time. Even with a heroic dose, you think, oh, it's one and done, which is what my problem was. I thought, oh, it's going to be one and done and I'm going to be great. Is you need to have that grace period where you're like, hey, you can work on this and you're capable. And so the gratitude and that self-compassion that comes with that is pretty impressive. Early on, when I had that major anxiety, I was my facilitator and I came up with a thing. If I got anxious during the day while I was at work, I found that if I did kind of a mindful walk and I actually just thought about things when I could get away from work for 20 minutes, is I would save it for the walk. And that was kind of the little mantra of the day. Hey, start to feel anxious, just save it for the walk and take it to the walk. And then you come back from the walk and you're like, hey, great, the day is good. So, but don't let yourself get to such a negative place that that you don't. It's hard to say. I just realize there's other options than any. You know, that these are very positive options. The research is coming around. You know, if you're really into science and why this is happening, well, that's going to take some time to figure out. But to realize all of the positive stories that are happening in all different areas of the psychologies, you know, like I said, with the anorexia nervosa, those kinds of things, it is really phenomenal, the power of this medicine.
That's a great point to leave it on, David. Wonderful story. Happy ending for sure. Thank you for taking the time, and not only that, but having the courage to come on here and tell your story, both good and bad. And that takes a lot. I know that's not easy to do. And you don't know how much I appreciate you doing this. And not just for me, not just for the show, but for the people that are watching and listening to this, that need help, that just don't know where to go. And
Right.
I do want to make it clear, none of the thing that we're talking about is medical advice, as I say on every show, but just sharing the story with others that are hurting all over the world. It's wonderful. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time, and good luck, and stay in touch and let us know how you're doing into the future, because I'm sure I want to know, and I'm sure everybody wants to know how you're going to feel 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years. Let's make it a point to stay in touch, and let's find out, maybe get you back on and do a recap after a short amount of time. Let's see what happens.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.